Good, welcome to everyone. Thank you for coming. This is a very odd experience, talking to a computer screen, but I'll do my best. We'll see how we get on. So as Kate said, I'm Andy King. I look after all our history things, really. So I'm responsible for the social history collections and also the industrial and maritime collections and all those working exhibits. I'm also a bit of a crane geek. They interest me so much that my wife will tell you that we seek them out whenever we go on holiday. We even spent my 60th birthday inside a crane, which has been converted into a tiny hotel room for two in Northern Holland. It's so please do try and go if you can. My interest in cranes is due to the cranes on Prince's Wharf. I've spent almost 40 years looking at them from my office window, and I've been trying to bring them back to life for nearly 30. During that time, they've become icons of the city, appearing everywhere as symbols of Bristol, from promotional material to tea towels. They are constantly photographed, and they've even appeared in 3 feature films in the last few years. By museum standards, the cranes aren't that old. During the Second World War, the old corporation granary on Prince's Wharf was blitzed, making space for a brand new general cargo wharf, built to the most up-to-date standards of the 1950s. Ship's cargo could be swiftly unloaded and loaded and stored in the transit sheds, which are now M-shed, or put directly onto railway wagons or onto road transport, as is very evident in this photograph, which I'm sure has been staged particularly for that purpose. The 8 cranes that stood there originally were all built by Stoddart and Pitt of Bath. They were the go-to crane builders for quayside cranes at the time, and their products can still be seen all over the world, many of them still at work. Our cranes unloaded their first cargo in April 1952. 7 of the cranes, the ones to the left of the picture, can lift 2 tons at this stage. They were later upgraded to 3, but the one on the right, number 32, the big one, could cope with 10 tons. In 1954, after this photograph was taken, it was decided to put it on the other side of the harbour, outside a shed, where it was going to be more useful. And it stayed there until 1970, when a shed closed and they moved it back again. At that time, there were still nearly 40 cranes on sheds and other quaysides around the harbour. Sorry, let's just get myself clicking the right button, sorry about that. So amongst them were these on what is now the watershed and on Broad Quay. These were old hydraulic cranes powered by high pressure water supplied all the way from the underfall yard. Their cargoes were often French brandy and wine, and less romantically, lard. And then these cranes, electric ones, on the roof of Y Shed on the left-hand side, where the Bristol City line once ran to New York and Canada, and on the roof of V and U sheds, which are now pubs and restaurants on Bordeaux Quay, but once the destination for Spanish and Portuguese ships bringing port and olive oil and wine and oranges. However, once the closure of the city centre docks was announced in 1969, their number began to dwindle quite quickly as they were scrapped, sometimes in a very spectacular way, like these on the mud dock, or some of them moved to Avonmouth for reuse. And by 1975, there were just the 4 on Prince's Wharf, together with the listed steam crane a little further down, all looking rather forlorn on deserted quaysides. Now, to me, cranes are emblematic of ports. They are the physical link between the city and the far-flung parts of the globe that the ships have come from. Once the cranes have gone, the landscape no longer looks like a port, and a significant connection to the city's maritime past has gone. Not only that landscape link, however, it's also a tangible link to the social history of the city's people. On any day, up to 2,000 men were employed on a casual basis, what we call 0 hours contracts these days, unloading the ships in the city and at Avonmouth. The availability of that huge flexible pool of dockers was a vital element of the system that operated in ports throughout the country until the advent of containers in the 1970s. They were moving cargo that had been stowed by hand at the port of departure in packages small enough to be manhandled. It also influenced the design of the cranes. They lift a relatively small maximum load because that's as much as a gang of men can move in the time that it takes for the crane to deliver a load and return for the next one. So there's no need for them to be able to carry any more. Speed was of the essence, and that was where the driver came in. After 7 weeks training, crane drivers were left to hone their skills at operating the hoist, luffing and slewing of the crane with real cargoes, and the better ones became almost balletic in the way they could move the cranes around. The gangs of dockers working beneath them appreciated fast but safe drivers who could make a very substantial difference to their pay if they were on piecework. There were perks to the job. The driver was always sent to the front of the queue at dinner time to ensure that they were back up in the cab when the dockers were ready to start again. But it also meant standing at the controls for 8 hours. There's no seat in these cranes, concentrating on the swing of the hook and the position of the jib to ensure that you didn't hit a neighbouring crane or injure the men toiling in the hold beneath you. That whole world of hard manual labour and the skills and techniques it required, the language of the work, terms like trays and snotters and slings and dunnage and can hooks and turning out and black books. The pen where you offered yourself for work, and the bump, the rubber stamp you got if you didn't get it on that particular day. The complex system of rates of pay for different work and the names for them. So splinter money for handling timber, sticky money for sugar, allowances for laundering after handling red oxide powder, and also the subculture of camaraderie, nicknames, and petty larceny has all but disappeared. Our cranes were a part of this, working for nearly 25 years to unload ships like the dam boats and others arriving from the Baltic with timber and with paper pulp for the board mills at St Anne's. And those of the Bristol Steam Navigation Company that ran a twice weekly service to and from Dublin, taking English goods like Ferguson tractors out and returning with bacon and cabbages and butter and masses of Guinness. The cranes were actually uprated to 3 tons capacity to allow them to handle these beer tanks. Our cranes unloaded the last regular trader to Bristol in November 1974, before the closure of the docks in 1975. And then they were sold for scrap. Fortunately, at the time, there was a group of people in 1975 who appreciated those cranes. Using the 1970s equivalent of crowdfunding, basically ringing everyone that they knew to ask them to chip in by buying shares, enough money was raised to buy 2 of the cranes back from the scrap merchant. They even raised enough surplus to start a ferry service, but that's another story. At the same time, the city council was persuaded to buy back the other 2. Although these actions saved the cranes, little thought had been given to what would happen to them next. The future development of the harbour at the time was very much undecided, and there were many conflicting opinions. And in 1978, City Council officers again questioned whether all 4 cranes should be kept, as they obscured views of the new industrial museum and were looking scruffy. So they proposed scrapping 3 and using the proceeds to pay for painting the survivor. City Docks Ventures, the action group that had been formed to save the cranes, vehemently opposed this and drew up a scheme to show how the cranes might have a useful future as architects' studios, a TV camera platform, and an extension of the museum. All in reality completely unfeasible, but enough to divert attention at the time. The cranes were painted shortly after this, but little else happened to them for over 20 years. They passed into the care of the museum in 1989, but the team of volunteers that were working there at the time had their work cut out restoring the Industrial Museum's railway, steam crane, and 3 boats. 2 things happened in the late 1990s to change all of that. Firstly, we welcomed an influx of volunteers who had newly retired from the electrical and telecoms world, bringing new skills to our workforce that enabled us to consider doing something with the cranes. We acquired a second-hand scissor lift, and it's still at work 25 years later, and carried out a condition assessment and some basic cleaning work. 20 years of pigeon residence had created quite a build-up of guano, about 6 inches, I think, which did my garden the world of good. The second catalyst was a visit from Andy Hay, then director of the Bristol Old Vic Theatre. The play Up the Feeder Down the Mouth, written entirely from the reminiscences of dockers and mariners by A.C.H. Smith, a local playwright, had been staged at the theatre in 1996, and Andy wanted to repeat the production on Prince's Wharf, making use of many of the museum's exhibits as very large props. We readily agreed and committed to having 1 crane ready to play a part in the production. We just managed it, jury rigging a power supply, overhauling only the most essential elements, and learning how to drive it. The crane played a supporting role in each performance, along with what was considered to be the biggest prop in theatre nationwide that year, 2001, the 1,000-ton cargo ship, Lucy. She was the first cargo vessel to visit the wharf since 1974. After this, work proceeded steadily, with major components from the cranes being lifted out of the motor rooms for overhaul in our workshops, and the rotten wood of the walkways and the cab floors being repaired and renewed. By the time the Industrial Museum finally closed its doors in 2006, 2 of the cranes had been fully certified. And over that period, we used the cranes for acrobatic performances, such as the one on the left, in the organic food fair. We made the cranes chat to each other, like 2 old men grumpily reminiscing about their lives and discussing what was going on in the now closed building. The cranes played a crucial role in the removal of objects from the museum prior to building work to create M-Shed, like this wooden hand loom that's on its way to an off-site store. We filled 28 articulated lorry loads like this. We were unable to do much more work on the cranes during the 4 years of building work for MShed, but when the museum opened in 2011, the cranes were central to the opening ceremony, lifting the performers who heralded the new museum. In the decade since, we've reintroduced the conversations, this time characterising the cranes as females, and hosted a treehouse for 6 months on Crane 29. We've lifted a number of couples to their wedding receptions on the top floor of MShed and welcomed hundreds of visitors to the driving cabs of the cranes. Every year we make an attempt at recreating the working quayside for Docks Heritage Weekend, unfortunately not this year. And most spectacularly, in 2015, the 3 active cranes danced in a performance choreographed by Laura Kriefman. You can still watch Crane Dance Bristol on YouTube if you missed it. And as one of the drivers for this, I can tell you it was completely nerve-wracking. We do useful things with the cranes as well. Here you can see on the left our steam tug Mayflower's boiler being lifted out by crane 32. And on the right, the boiler from our locomotive Henbury returning from overhaul quite recently. Crane 32, which we returned to service 2 years ago, can lift 10 tons. So it's very useful to us for heavier loads. But we've also lifted masts out of ships, out of sailing vessels, lifted objects in and out of the museum store, and launched pontoons for the harbour master, in amongst loads of other jobs. From the start, the survival and the rebirth of our cranes has been the work of the city's people. They were saved by the actions of a small group of individuals in 1975. Their restoration has only been possible by dozens of volunteers, contributing to date 55,000 hours of help. Their operation and maintenance is similarly achieved by volunteer effort. What we've done with our cranes is unique in the world. There are other preserved cranes, but very few that still operate, and none that you can visit like ours. I'm really proud of what we've achieved so far, and I'm looking forward to seeing the last of the cranes back in action in the next year or two. There are some things, however, that we can't do. And the biggest of these is repainting the cranes from top to bottom. A good paint system is the first line of defence in preserving the cranes. Once the paint protection fails, corrosion begins in parts of the structure that are difficult to repair and replace. There's certainly no spare parts for these cranes. We need to pay specialist contractors to do this, and we're planning to take advantage of the lull in normal activity on the site that's been caused by the COVID crisis to achieve this. In the autumn, all 4 cranes should be repainted from top to bottom, work that's going to cost around £50,000. We've launched a fundraising appeal, which I hope you'll feel able to contribute towards. You can do this by going to the Bristol Museum's website at bristolmuseums.org.uk and clicking on the link at the bottom of the page, or going to Just Giving and searching for Bristol Cranes. Or you might like to consider joining our team of volunteers. We're not doing an awful lot just at the moment, but we are beginning to build up to working fully again at the museum. Please help us to guarantee the survival of these Bristol icons for the future, and do come to visit them when we're next able to open them. Thank you very much for tuning in this afternoon.